Sorry, I'm having trouble with my cursor. Hi, I'm Dr. Julie Lockbaum, and my cursor is locked up here, so I'm having a little bit of a delay getting started with you. I will be your instructor for the summer session, summer 1 session of ED6005 and SED530, the Psychology of Exceptional Children. We'll do some other orientation materials after I get this first lecture part done, but I wanted to go ahead and begin with the content of the course. In your teams later on this afternoon and evening, after you have viewed this lecture, I'm going to be asking you to talk to each other about what brought you to this point in your pathway to becoming an educator, or to whatever future pathway you are headed. What has brought you to this point that you are taking this course? Okay. What on your journey has brought you to the point that you are taking Psychology of Exceptional Children? I want you to be thinking about that, mulling that over. You're going to talk to each other in teams about that later on today or tonight. I'll give you a little bit of a hint about what's brought me to this point. I started here in Kirksville, just where you are. I am a Truman graduate from 1980. I graduated with a bachelor's degree in philosophy and religion. Later, I found my true destiny that I had been in denial about, and I did begin a teaching career after earning something that's very much like the MAE, an initial certification at the master's level. I earned that in South Carolina in 1986. Later, I went back and earned my PhD in Foundations of Education, which is the history, sociology, and psychology of education, also earning that from the University of South Carolina in 1998. I've had a number of teaching opportunities across 30 years. I started very early. My very first teaching experience was in what we called then the classroom for the visually impaired, for the blind and visually impaired. It was all children in the Kirksville R3 school district who had vision impairments, all in one room, all ages, all grades, all abilities, all in one room. This was before the federal special education law, IDEA. This was back in 1976 when Missouri was actually first. We were actually leading the nation. We had a statewide special education law long before the federal law was passed. And it was at the beginning of implementing that statewide law that we began to have special education classrooms that operated much like the old one-room schools. All the students with a common disability were gathered in one schoolroom. So that's how I began this particular journey towards special education. Along the way, I did a lot of other things, ending up with faculty development positions at A.T. Still University and here at Truman, and that's how I actually came to Truman. Research interests, I'm interested in the history of Truman, a foundations person who has a great-grandmother who attended this institution when it was the first district normal school. I think the history of the institution is kind of an obvious interest of mine. So these are the kinds of things that I'd like you to share with each other later on in your teams. How did you come to be in the point of your journey now where you're taking a course, the Psychology of Exceptional Children? All right, other things we're going to look at in this particular section. We're going to be looking at the concept of professionalism. This is something that's very important as we prepare to be professional teachers, and it's extremely important in the context of special education and working with those special students who are in our general education classrooms. Why is this a required course? Well, it's the law, but you're going to see a couple of other reasons later on in the presentation. You're going to see some information about just what is the prevalence in the general education classroom of students who have special needs. You're going to see some information later in the presentation about shortages of teachers and characteristics of teachers. And you're going to see information in the presentation about disproportionality. What kinds of students are disproportionately assigned to special education? out of proportion to their occurrence in the general population. These are all reasons, and they'll become more clear as we go, but these are all reasons why this is a required course for your certification as a public school teacher in the state of Missouri. We're also going to look a little bit at course logistics, the syllabus, the objectives, texts and readings. There's a group syllabus quiz, a team syllabus quiz that I want you to take. And there are team exercises all the way throughout the course that we want to be sure we get your assigned teams squared away, and be sure that your assigned teams of 4 people, more or less, can find common meeting time to process the prompts that are in the team exercises throughout the course. So let's just go straight to professionalism, becoming a teacher. You know, you're becoming a teacher, you'll have a license from the state that grants you a monopoly right to be a teacher, to fulfill those public school teaching positions. And so we as teachers have a social contract to uphold. In return for getting that monopoly license, the society expects that we will do some certain activities and we will behave in some certain ways. Here are some of them. Society expects that in return for that monopoly license, we will be consumers of research. We don't necessarily have to be producers of research, but society does expect us to consume research. And this is so that our profession doesn't become backward-looking. This is so our profession will continue to be forward-looking and to grapple with and successfully meet the challenges that come across a 30-year career after you are granted that monopoly license. We are expected to be members of professional organizations. Many of you have already started this. You are members and officers even in MSTA or NEA or Massey or the Foreign Language Lingua Profs or some of these professional student organizations. Well, you know what? Society expects us to continue those memberships in professional organizations. This is how we keep the stimulation of new ideas going. This is how we learn how to interpret some of that research that we continue to consume. This is how we make friends and colleagues who can help us when we are struggling, or who can give us ideas for how to meet problems head on. Many of the professional organizations have really shined during the COVID crisis, providing support, technical support, monetary support, and emotional support as teachers across the nation are thrown into learning all kinds of new things. So society expects us to maintain those professional organizations and maintain membership in them. Our professional organizations also are often the locus of our accountability. As a profession, we are largely granted the privilege to police ourselves. Much of that policing or assessing or accountability happens within our professional organizations. And of course, one of the things that professional organizations provide for us are those journals where we can easily consume the research, those conferences where we can meet our colleagues, network with our colleagues, solve problems, ruminate on the future, find out how best to interpret that research. Those journals and conferences that we are able to access because we maintain membership in professional organizations, those are some important ways that we maintain the commitment to lifelong learning. We model for our society what it looks like when a person is a lifelong learner. The induction process, this is a hallmark of professions. There is a protracted and very deliberate induction process. This is something that you are participating in right now. You can't just show up at a school and say, hire me, I want to be a teacher. There is an induction process that requires study, academics, training, field experience, and a certain level of achievement in all of those marks to be inducted into the profession. And all of those steps require collaboration and colleagues. You don't just practice teach on your own. There's a mentor teacher. There's a mentor principal. There's a university supervisor. All steps of this induction process happen with collaborators and colleagues. The professions set high standards for performance and behavior in those steps of the induction process. It's not just a matter of completing it, check it off the box, check the box and move on. There has to be completion at a high standard that is maintained and assessed by the profession and other collaborators and colleagues. So this self-policing function of a profession is very important, and we want to uphold the privilege that we have been given to do that, to self-assess, to self-monitor. We don't want to take that for granted, and we don't want to abuse that privilege. Professionalism also means that we're going to find out, we're going to pursue teaching as both a science and an art and a skill set. It is, it's all three of these things. It's a science, it's an art, and it's a skill set. In some of your field experiences, you've been working on the skill set. In some of your courses, you've been working on the art. There is a real judgment call placed. This is why teaching is still done by people. Many COVID-19 parents are literally crying for teachers to work their art magic with students again. But in this class, we're going to be emphasizing more the teaching as a science and teaching as a skill set. We're going to be emphasizing mostly the science of exceptional learners and particular behavior management and curriculum management skills that you will need to acquire to meet the needs of exceptional learners. If you're interested in more about teaching as a science and a skill set, these are some links that may help you explore that a little bit. One thing I do want to bring your attention to is this last item down here. Remember, we are responsible for consuming the research literature. We are responsible for lifelong learning. We are responsible for understanding the science and the skill sets as well as the art of our profession. We are responsible for assessing our profession. We're responsible to understand and articulate pedagogical content knowledge. That is, what are the things about this particular study in history that students traditionally struggle with or that are easy for them to understand? It's not just enough to know all about the Civil War. We also have to have the pedagogical content knowledge of here's where students in middle school struggle with concepts pertaining to the Civil War, that pedagogical content knowledge. And we have to continue to develop expertise. But there are challenges in translating that knowledge base. There really is a knowledge base to teaching. There are challenges in translating that knowledge base into practice, that theory into practice. But one of the things that we sometimes overlook is that a major challenge to translating theory into practice is community control. In our nation, we are committed to a very decentralized system of education. Local school districts, sometimes these are smaller entities than a city or a town. Sometimes there are cities that have multiple school districts within the boundaries of one municipality. We are committed in this country to that decentralized control of public education. And that means there's community control. The students in our classes are other people's children, and we are teaching them with other people's money. These very often will throw up challenges to implementing our theoretical knowledge base about teaching. And as teachers, we are always navigating a position of balance between what do we know from our expertise is right and good and effective, and what are the community standards within which we are called to deliver that expertise. So community control, other people's children, this is something significant that we navigate daily in public school education. Well, if that's part of what it's like to be professionals, who are these professionals who are teachers? This is where you will need to pause the presentation for a moment. I've given you a link here to the National Center on Educational Statistics. This is the gold standard for anything you want to know of a statistical nature about education in the United States. So I've given you a link here just to a quick fact sheet on the condition of education teachers. Follow this link and then find yourself in the context of the information in the figures 1, 2, and 3 on this web page. There are 6 figures on this web page, but 4, 5, and 6 pertain to practicing teachers who've already been in the field. Find yourself in figures 1, 2, and 3. Do you fit the overall national pattern, or do you deviate from the overall national pattern of who our teachers are? Pause the presentation while you follow that link. Okay, well now you've looked at the overall federal snapshot, who are our teachers. Now I want you to look at who are our teachers in Missouri. In Missouri, the most recent information on the teacher population is always available in December through an annual report given to the state legislature. So I've given you a link here to the latest December 2019 annual report provided to our legislators, and it's always couched as a retention report to the state legislators. So here again, I want you to follow this link and place yourself. Are you typical of the teachers in the teaching force in the state of Missouri, or do you deviate from the typical in some way? A second question I want you to use to interrogate this document that I've linked to is, are Missouri's ethnicities, races, and genders represented in our state's teaching force the same as or different from the national statistics? Are we more or less white than the national typical teacher? Are we more or less female identifying than the typical national teacher? Are we older or younger than the national typical teacher? Please take a moment to pause the presentation as you check this website and answer those questions to yourself. It's still a little bit shocking to me that according to Missouri's own data, 39.9%, so it's basically 40% of first-year teachers leave the profession after 1 year. Think about that attrition rate. If other professions, let's say, if the profession of physicians had a 39% or 40% attrition rate after the first year of practice, wouldn't we be up in arms about that attrition rate? What about accountants? If Missouri lost nearly 40% of its accountants after 1 year in practice, wouldn't we be up in arms about that attrition rate? This is an alarming finding. While the pipeline of people interested in becoming teachers has dropped some, it has not dropped tremendously over the years, but the attrition rate at the 1 year mark has exploded. What is going on? Why are we contemplating steps like rescinding tenure, making it harder to enter the profession, when Missouri is facing a 39.9% attrition rate after the first year of teaching? These are public policy decisions that fly in the face of the statistical data. We know that new teachers are more likely to leave the field than experienced teachers. So if you get past that difficult first year, the attrition rate is less, but I would maintain the attrition rate is still rather alarming. We know from the data in Missouri and elsewhere that teachers who work in low socioeconomic status schools are more likely to attrite, to leave after that first year. So many measures of difficulty are correlated very strongly with low socioeconomic status schools and students. These are just more challenging circumstances in which to teach. We know from data that challenging student behavior is one of the top 3 reasons why teachers leave. Usually it is the top reason. especially if, depending on the way the survey is worded, if you combine challenging student behavior with lack of respectful behavior from households or from the community at large. That's usually the top reason teachers give for leaving the profession. The second reason teachers give for leaving the profession is working conditions. Only third is the reason given that the salary is too low. When we lose a teacher who has gone all the way through the long pipeline to become certified and to be hired and to take a position and teach that position for the first year, when we lose that person, it's estimated that nationally, with that level of attrition, we are costing our schools $2.2 billion. That's because it costs a school district about 30% of a teacher's salary to search for and onboard a new replacement. So there's an attrition rate in Missouri, but is there a shortage of teachers in Missouri? Especially, you're probably concerned about, is there a shortage of teachers in Missouri in your planned area that you want to go into? Well, here's the site that will help you answer that question. Take a moment, pause the presentation as you examine that site. Is your future teacher certification area in demand? All right, we've looked a bit at who are teachers, what are the conditions for teachers, how does that fare in Missouri? But now let's look at who are our students. We're in a course about psychology of exceptional children. So who are these exceptional children who are our students? Well, again, we're going to go back to Missouri DESE, Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. We usually pronounce that D-E-S-E as DESE. So you're going to be consulting DESE pages frequently throughout this course. So we'll start with Missouri and work our way up to the federal level this time, instead of starting at the federal level and working our way down to Missouri like we did for our profile on teachers. This link is the link to the profile on who are the special education students in Missouri. I'm going to ask you again to pause this presentation as you examine that web link and find out the answer to this question. What percent of students with disabilities receive 79% or more of their schooling in the general education classroom? Not in the segregated special education classroom, but in your classroom, you, the general education teacher, the teacher of social studies, the art teacher, the fourth grade teacher, not the special education teacher. What percent of students with disabilities receive 79% or more of their schooling in the general education classroom? Pause the presentation while you follow the link for that question. Okay, that's the situation in the state of Missouri. Now, what about federally? What about nationally? Is the percentage the same or different? Here's the link back again to that Bible of Education Statistics, NCES. All your careers, you're going to want to reference NCES, National Center for Educational Statistics. Don't ever participate in a conversation where you're just guessing. Follow the links, go to NCES. I guarantee you they have the data. Any question you've got in mind. So in just a moment, I want you to access this particular link at NCES for the answer to these two questions. What percent of students received what percent of their schooling in the general education classroom nationally? You've just seen the percent of students in Missouri who receive 79% or more of their schooling in the general education classroom. Now I'm asking you for the 3 percentage breakdowns that the federal government collects data on. What percent of students receive what percent of their schooling in the general education classroom nationally? And then further, I want you to interrogate the figures you see at this link. Are races, ethnicities, and genders represented among those special education students in the same proportion as races, ethnicities, and genders appear in the general population? Interrogate the data and the charts to see the answers to those two questions. Pause the presentation as you research. You noticed from the chart at NCES that all races, genders, and ethnicities are not represented in special education recognized categories at the same level that they appear in the general population. This is a concept called disproportionality. Disproportionality. And that means being out of proportion with something. There is a disproportion between the number of children in certain special education categories based on their ethnicity, their race, their culture, their language, or their gender identity. This means that factors other than the recognized disability are accounting for some of the labeling of these students as special education students. Furthermore, disproportionality only exists in those categories of disability recognized by the federal government that are subjective. These subjective categories are learning disabilities, emotional and behavioral disorders, and more. Disproportionality is not found for disability categories which are objectively medically diagnosed. These recognized disability categories include such things as hearing impairment. There's an audiology test, you get a score. Visual impairment, you have an eye exam, you get a prescription. Physical disability, there's an obvious malformation of a leg. Disproportionality by race, gender, ethnicity, culture, or language does not exist in these objective categories. Disproportionality only exists in public education pertaining to subjective categories of disability. So why are we talking about disproportionality? Because special education referrals are made by you. They are made by teachers. Misidentification, either way, under-identifying or over-identifying students for special education, either way, is costly. It costs money. If a student is identified and receiving special education services who does not actually need it, that is costly. Worse, if a student needs special education services but isn't receiving them, later on down the line, the retrofitting back for that student is even more costly. So misidentification is costly. And especially as we move into 10 and 20% cuts to education budgets following the coronavirus crisis, costly misidentification is not going to be something school districts can afford. Now, regardless of cost, something that probably concerns most of us greatly, since we are trying to enter a human services profession, is the fact that misidentification is so personally damaging to the students and families. Terribly personally damaging. Sometimes lifelong damage is done by misidentification, either by erroneously identifying a student as needing special education or by denying that student special education. the personal damage, emotional damage, career damage, relationship damage, cognitive damage and learning opportunity damage, and employment damage is incalculable. Teachers need to be culturally competent in order to avoid confusing difference with disability. Part of our monopoly license given to us by states expects that we will be so professionally competent and so professionally self-assessing that we will not confuse difference with disability. Disproportionality is a huge reason this course is required for certification of general classroom teachers, not just special education teachers. So why are we here? Most of us are not planning to be special education teachers. That can change as your career progresses across 30 years, but most of us are not planning to be special education teachers. So we need this course because we need to have an overview of what's going on for those students who spend 79% or more of their learning time in school with us in the general education classroom. The majority of special education students receive the majority of their schooling in the general education classroom. So all of us have to have a baseline competency in how to effectively work with all of our students. A version of this course is required for certification in every state in the country. So don't think you can avoid it by saying, I'm going to go to North Carolina. No, they require it too. Maybe a different name, but the competencies are the same. This tells us that the content is assumed to be mastered in return for receiving our professional license. That monopoly license that we are granted comes with a social contract. And one other plank that society expects from us in return for that license is that we will have the competency necessary to effectively work with special education students. So, to that end, we're going to acquire knowledge and skills in the following. We're going to acquire knowledge and skills in a little teeny tiny slice of special education law. We're going to acquire knowledge and skills in a larger subsection of characteristics of diverse learners and effective instructional practice for those diverse learners. We're going to be looking at 13 federally recognized categories of disability. There are many ways to cut the pie, to slice the pie of disability, but for us in public education, we go by the 13 federally recognized categories of disability, and the chapters in your textbook are titled after those recognized categories of disability. So we're going to be looking at and learning about characteristics of these diverse learners, as well as effective instructional practices for these diverse learners. We're also going to be looking at behavior management. Many of the categories of disability that are federally recognized are concurrent with standard, typical, expected patterns of behavior. Some of these patterns of behavior require management in the collective group setting in public schools. Some do not. And some that will or won't, that will depend on your particular teaching setting. But overall, through this course, we're going to be looking at these 3 bullets: special education law, just a little bit; characteristics of diverse learners, quite a bit; effective instructional practices for diverse learners, a lot; and behavior management theory and practice, quite a bit. After perusing this lecture, I'm going to expect teams to do the syllabus quiz in groups of 4 or more. You'll be assigned to teams of 4 or more, so you'll be able to access these team exercises, including the syllabus quiz, as a team. You will be needing to get familiar with your textbook very, very quickly. The readings are scheduled on the course calendar, and I've also tried to indicate what the readings are within each yellow folder. The policies are on the syllabus, and I know students hardly ever read all the policies, but we are required by law to post the policies, so I'd very much like you to take a look at those. It takes a long time to get those all shaped up and into the syllabus, so please don't skip the policy section of the syllabus. I've given some information in the syllabus about what attendance in an online environment means, what kind of team behavior we're expecting for this course. There's information in the syllabus about technology requirements to be able to successfully navigate the course. And there is also information in the syllabus about the need for punctuality in team processing and in turning in work. This is one of the dispositions that Missouri requires us to assess in teacher candidates: punctuality and reliability. There is a course calendar in a separate entry so that it didn't get all bogged down with the syllabus. Blackboard is your friend. You need to check Blackboard every day. 7 days a week might be a good idea, definitely 5 days a week. And there is also a prompt on the syllabus quiz for you to ask me your remaining questions that are not clarified by thoroughly perusing the textbook, the readings, the policies, the syllabus, the course calendar, and the Blackboard site. Please be honest and open with your team in discussing what your remaining questions are, and any that the 4 of you are not able to resolve, please be sure you do submit to me in that final prompt on the syllabus quiz. I will be publicly posting the answers to all of those remaining questions that are coming through. All right, once you have completed the syllabus quiz with your assigned team, here are some of the things that are due very quickly. Summer session is, it's rapid, it's intense, okay? It's doable, but it's intense. Don't get behind. Initially, you're going to work with your team on that syllabus quiz, and then you are also going to need to submit the assignment, What is a Disability? This is located on Blackboard in the Assignments tab. This is due before class tomorrow, before you watch the next Zoom lecture. It's a short reflection on your current definition of disability, whatever that is. It doesn't have to be APA. We're not doing formal writing on this. 500 words or so is probably about what I usually get for this assignment. Enough that you can't just give me a little one bullet phrase and call it good, but I also don't want a 3-page paper either, okay? So what is your current definition of a disability or disability? Do this before you do any of the textbook readings. This is just your thinking at this point in time. It's a snapshot of your thinking at this point in time, and there's no right or wrong. We're not looking for right or wrong here. The value of this assignment is that you're going to revisit it at the end of the course and do some reflection on your growth in understanding and empathy that may have happened across the process of the course. Okay, so there's no right or wrong, no APA format, but it does need to be substantively written so that you can make that review comparison at the end of the course. After you've done this assignment, that's the time to hit the books, okay? Your Hallahan, Kaufman, and Pullen chapters 1 and 2 will need to be read, and those are on exceptionality in special education and current practices. There are required readings beyond the course text, the Hallahan, Kaufman, and Pullen text at various times through the semester. And those are all posted on Blackboard within the yellow folder unit that they belong to. So you do not have to purchase anything else, and you don't have to find links to anything else. I've tried to post everything in PDF form or whatever it came in, so that you have that. Soon, you're going to be reading an article for an article summary. And so it's, if meeting with your team, writing the what is a disability, and getting started on these initial readings doesn't keep you busy enough tonight, you can also look ahead at that article that you'll be doing the article summary assignment on. This is a lot for one round, day one. Remember, in the summer session, every day is a week. So if you need to pause this presentation in bits and come back to it now and then, that's perfectly fine. And of course, you are free to watch it as many times as you wish. But here's one closing thought as you launch into the exercises and the readings that you're going to do before the next lecture session. What is normal? You're going to grapple with the concept of what is disability. But before tomorrow's lecture, I also want you to think a minute about what is normal. Thank you so much for joining me for this lecture and for your patience as we work through things. I really appreciate your time. I'll see you tomorrow.